This is me, the Grand Vizier, the leader of the Ottoman army. This is going to be the first outing of the Ottomans on the Napoleonic battlefield. They are up against the Russians in a clash in the middle of the Russian-Turkish War. The map that we are going to use will be based on Scharnhorst campaign, which will play first in order to set up the battlefield, and we each have an army of 300 points. Now, the Turkish plan is to defend because the Russians are very fierce in defense, but more dodgy on the attack. So the Turkish hope to defend on the battlefield and then, with their superior numbers, swarm the Russians after a strong defense. They have created 4 columns, and they have also put 4 units into irregular cavalry, since the Ottoman irregular cavalry doesn't suffer fatigue when it comes back from reconnaissance. So they put 4 irregular cavalry into reconnaissance. They've also bought 6 entrenchments that those are hoping to anchor the defensive line against the Russians, while the flanks work to move forwards. The first column is the attack column, so that's got the veteran janissaries in it who can move forwards, and a strong column of 10 units. The second column is also 10 units, that's the defensive column, and it has the artillery in it, and also the Nizam-e-Sadid, which are the modern troops who are the equal of the Russians. Columns 3 and 4 are quite similar. They've got a mix of weak infantry and regular cavalry, which are the flanking columns. So our plan is to anchor the Russians with the big columns and then bring the other columns in on the flanks. We'll see how it goes. We're using Scharnhorst campaign system to set up the battle, and we are using the Eastern Europe map. So this is the plan. Now we declare how many units we have in reconnaissance. I have 4 units in reconnaissance. The Russians have only 3. So that means the Ottoman Turks have the intelligence. Now they choose to come on from the east. That is because they can easily pick up victory points around Brankovi. That will put them in the lead for victory points, which will mean the Russians will need to come to them on the battlefield, and they'll be able to defend. The Turks decide to have the first move, since they can choose, since they have the intelligence, and they move one of their columns out into up the road. You can only move 3 points in the first turn, so it's impossible to get into contact. So this first is a strong column and leading the way, and it will be followed by the other columns. The Russian column moves up the road to E3, and the second big Ottoman column moves to D7 up the road. No big surprises here. A second Russian column moves to E2 up the road, and the third Ottoman column moves to D8 up the road. The final Ottoman column comes on C8, and the Russian column comes on C1. And that is the end of the first day. Currently victory points standing at 3 for the Ottomans and 1 for the Russians, based on the villages and towns taken. The Ottomans make a bold move forwards, capturing Chminsky, to sending one of their strong columns to C4. Did this in order to ensure that we have a battle in the center of the map, and to prevent the Russian capturing any of the additional towns, which would enable him to defend. The Russian moves up column 3 to C3 and then scouts the big Ottoman column and finds out that it is a 10-unit column. The Ottoman moves up its second strong column to column D to D5. It wants to keep it very close to the other 10-unit columns so that they won't get isolated and destroyed. The Russian makes a bold move. He pushes column 1 up to E6, capturing Koriznik and putting his column in the heart of the Ottoman territory. So that is a bold move. He should be able to defend it. Column B moves up and scouts column 1 and finds that it is a 10-unit column. So he's put a big force there. That means that he's looking for a fight. With column B and column 1 there, he could trigger a battle, which would be at a disadvantage for the Russians unless they can bring up reinforcements. The Russians not just bring up reinforcements, column 4 moves to D4, but they also manage to scout column D and find out that it is a 10-unit column as well. They've also left room for column 2 to advance up the road and take position between columns 1 and column 4. So this is the final position at the end of day 2. So the Ottomans have 4 victory points, the Russians have 3. That means that it would be the Russians who would have to attack in a battle. Now we roll dice to see who is going to declare a battle. That you roll a dice and you add your number of victory points, and the one with the lower total has the opportunity to declare the battle first. So if the Ottoman manages to declare the battle, then they are looking at setting it up in squares D5, D6, D7, and E5, E6, E7. And then they will move their column A and C over to Brankowy and try to shut out the Russians from reinforcing their columns 1 and 2. So then they would have the advantage. If the Russians manage to declare the battle, then they would set it up 1 square to the left, where they already have 3 columns on the map, and they are able to fit their last column into the E4 and shut out 2 of the Ottoman columns from the initial setup. The Russians roll a 3, the Ottomans roll a 4, and therefore the Russians get to choose the battlefield. So they choose the battlefield as set up on here, and they have columns 1, 2, and 4 set up on the map, whereas the Ottomans only have columns D and B. Then the units get to move. Russians get the first move, and they move their column 3 from this location into the map at the hill. The Ottomans then move column A from Gimilski to the right. It is able to move 3 squares since it's not on a road, and it appears on the edge of the map. So that is as far as they are able to do, and they choose not to move column C. They're quite happy with it coming on in that location. So this is the setup for the battlefield. You have 2 Ottoman columns, B and D, set up initially on the map, surrounded by the entire Russian army. They need to hold out until their reinforcements arrive, with column C arriving from the north and column A arriving from the right, and they will have to get there in time to rescue the Ottoman defenders. However, the Russians do have to attack because they are down on victory points, so they have to get a decisive win before the end of the battle, or the Ottomans will win. So this is what the terrain looks like for the battlefield. You take the 6 squares of the battlefield from the Scharnhorst map, and this is the compulsory terrain that has to be laid out on the table. In addition, each side gets 2 optional terrains to place anywhere on the map, but they can only place 1 item in 1 square. So this is how that map was translated onto the tabletop. The Russians are at the top right, the Ottomans on the bottom left. The village that you see next to the river is Korizny. And the other compulsory terrain, there is the river that separates the left-hand map squares. There is the marsh that is in the bend of the river. There is the woods that is over to the right of that marsh. And there is the marsh down in the bottom of the picture. And finally, over on the right, there is a wood and a hills in the corner. Now, the optional terrain that we put on, the Turkish put on too. He put on a village, which you see near the marsh in the bend of the river. That is to strengthen his defensive line. Also, over in the far left-hand side, you will see the hill that the Ottoman put on in order to boost his defensive position there. He knows that he needs to hold on as long as possible, and those 2 terrain pieces will help his defensive line. The Russians put on 2 as well. They put on the wood in the foreground next to the marsh. He knows that the Ottoman column is coming on in that segment, and he wants to make it as difficult as possible for them to sweep onto the map. So that is why that wood is there. And then a wood over in the far right to complete the Russian setup. Then we picked objectives. The town of Kozniki is naturally an objective. And you can see the Russian placed a second objective there just behind the cornfields. The fields are just for show to make it look pretty. They don't have any game effect. Over on the far left-hand side behind the hill, the Ottoman hill, you'll see the Ottoman place their objective. A way of winning the game is by capturing all the onboard objectives, and that is why the Ottoman has put it far over in the corner to make it as hard as possible for the Russians to take that objective. So that is the terrain. Then it was the Russian to set up first because they declared battle. So that's the terrain. Then we think about the deployments. If you remember back to the campaign Scharnhorst map, the Ottomans have to set up in the center, which is in the square in the bend of the river, and they also have to set up on the left on the far side of the river. So those are the only 2 squares that the Ottomans are allowed to occupy. The Russians occupy all other 4. So they have strong columns in the squares with the haystacks, and they have weaker columns in the other 2 squares. But the entire Russian army is on the board at the beginning. So the Ottomans are heavily outnumbered, 2 columns to 4. However, they do have reinforcements arriving. They have one reinforcement arriving near the camera, between the river and the woods and the marsh right in front of us. So that's where one of their 10 strong columns is arriving. The other column is arriving on the far side of the map, next to the Ottoman hill, on the left flank of that square. Now, because that one is arriving on a friendly board edge, it will be slightly earlier that it arrives. It has a reinforcement factor of 4, which means that it will arrive when it rolls on 1 dice times 4 is less than the turn number. So there's 1 chance in 6 of it arriving on turn 4, 1 chance in 6 on turn 6, 2 chances in 6 on turn 8, etc. The one nearest us is arriving in an enemy board edge, so that is a little harder, reinforcement factor of 5. So that means it will start with a chance on turn 6 with 1 chance in 6. That'll go up to 2 chances in 6 on turn 10 and beyond. So slightly easier for the far flank to arrive, but heavily weighted that the Ottomans will have to hold out about at least 10 turns without any reinforcements, but then increasingly likely that the reinforcements will arrive. So this is one column of Russians set up in the center. It is a concealed setup, so you don't know exactly what the units are until they move or until you get within 4 base widths. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Russian units in that central column. And on the other side of the river, we can see 10 units deployed. The Ottomans had scouted that column, so they knew that there were 10 setting up there. And here you can see the remainder of the Russian deployment. He has 6 units facing the Ottoman flank between the river and the wood. And then there are 4 units in the final segment. 3 of those were Cossacks who had been deployed on reconnaissance and were returning for the battle. We rolled fatigue for those, and they got a 2, 1, and 1, which, given that Cossacks only start with a strength of 4, makes them down to a 3, 3, 2, which is not very useful. So the Russian deployed first, and then the Ottoman deployed. You can see the deployment of the column on this side of the river. It has put down entrenchments so that it can fight off the Russian frontal attack. There are 1 unit garrisoning the village, and then 3 units in the entrenchment fighting off the Russians to their front. 2 units behind the entrenchments in reserve, 1 unit covering the wood, and then the remaining 5 facing off against the 6 Russian units on the flank. So it is a tough space to defend, with over 20 Russian units gathered around looking to attack only, well, with 2 returning irregular cavalry, so that makes it 12 units in this square. And here is the remaining deployment of the Ottomans. You can see 3 units manning the entrenchments next to the river. Then there are 3 units behind the hill, protecting the objective for the Russian army, and then 2 remaining units in reserve, which are the irregular cavalry returning to the battlefield. So only 8 weak units here to face the 10 strong Russian units, so looking a bit vulnerable on this flank. But there is the flank march coming in from the left, so the Ottoman player is hoping that his army can hold long enough for the flank column to arrive on and roll up the attacking Russians. And this is the strong Ottoman defensive position with 3 units entrenched and 1 unit in the garrison with some reserves behind. The hope is that they can hold out until the Ottoman reinforcements arrive. So in the first Russian turn, they declared 4 unit activation of their cavalry corps opposing the Ottoman flank, 3 dragoon units and 1 horse artillery unit. They all moved forward with the cavalry getting close enough to be able to declare a charge next turn. In their turn, the Ottoman declared their heavy artillery next to the river. It was positioned a little bit set back so that it would not be the greatest threat target for the horsemen, and they would have to charge the other units if they wanted to charge the artillery in order to prevent them being legal targets. It's not a guaranteed protection, but it at least makes sure that they can't be singled out for an attack. In the Ottoman shooting phase, they did well. They shot on the central dragoons and with 5 dice rolling, and because they are heavy, they hit on 6s and the first 5, so and they inflicted 2 hits, which brings that central dragoons down to a strength of 4. On the Russian first turn, on the far side of the map, the Russians moved forwards 3 brigades to advance on the hill. They also moved forwards their artillery and a militia unit behind. So that was a 5 pip move. Combined with the 4 pips from the other side, this was all that they were able to do on turn 1. The Ottoman did nothing on their turn on this side. They're sitting tight, waiting for the storm to break over them. At the start of the Russian third turn, they were within 4 base widths of the Ottoman line, so that meant that the Ottomans had to set their figures up on the board. So you see at the top, conscript janissaries behind the wood, then regular cavalry in the center, and then 1 unit of the Nizam-i Sadid in prepared position next to the guns. So the infantry should be well set to repel the dragoon charge, but the horse artillery is going to cause some problems. And this is the Russian third move. So the dragoons all charge in. That they have to charge the infantry square, even though it'll be very unlikely to be successful, in order that the dragoons on the near side are able to charge the artillery, so that the infantry square is no longer a legal target and they can legally charge the guns. More dragoons go in against the Ottoman regular cavalry, and the artillery comes up in order to start blasting the conscript janissaries. In a clever move, the Russian sweeps his guard round from the near the village at the top of the picture in a reserve move because it is all covered from Ottoman sight, and they sweep all the way behind the uh, Russian lines and then form up as a reserve behind the dragoons. And that is the Russian Guard Corps. There are 2 Guard Cuirassier units and also a unit of Guard Grenadiers. So putting a lot of pressure on the Ottoman line with some of the Russian best forces. Just the other side of the wood, you can see the Russian player moving his Cossacks forward, still staying outside shooting range of the entrenchments, but he is doing that in order to force the units in the entrenchment to be revealed so he can know what he is facing. And on the Russian right, the more infantry are committed to the assault on the hill. The other infantry advance, and a second battery of guns, heavy guns, is unveiled, but doesn't open fire yet. They're saving their ammunition for a good target. Because it was within 4 base widths at the start of the turn, 1 unit of Ottoman provincial infantry manning the entrenchments is revealed. So here you see the results of the Russian first attack on the Ottoman line. The horse artillery did very well. They inflicted 3 hits onto the conscript Janissaries, taking them down from a strength of 5 to 2. Leaving them effectively useless for the fight now. In a straight fight, there was a draw between the dragoons and the Ottoman regular cavalry. That means that the Russians bounce back, taking 2 hits, and the Ottomans take 1. Predictably, charging the square, the Nizam il-Sadid managed to bounce the Russian dragoons, who retreated, taking 2 extra hits, so they're down to a strength of 2, so almost taken out the game. However, the Russian dragoons bounced through the enemy, the guard behind them, leaving the guard set up for an attack next turn. The one area where the Russians had a chance was in their dragoons attacking the artillery, but they don't roll so well and get a draw, which means that the dragoons suffer 2 hits and the artillery suffers 1, and the dragoons bounce back. So dragoons inflicting attrition hits across the line, and now the guard is positioned to come in with a coup de grace. The Ottoman player knows that he needs to do something to shore up this line. So he shuffles his units around. He moves another unit of Nizam el-Sadid to the rear of the guns, and then has a unit of regular cavalry behind the square. And then his 2 units of irregular cavalry are backing up the regular cavalry unit. Does leave his entrenchment line without reserves, but the Russian doesn't appear to be focusing there. Finally, he shuffles his conscript Janissaries into the wood. They are pretty useless now, but at least they are safe from the artillery fire within the wood. He does not want his to lose units lightly, because he's only got a 6 breakpoint before the reinforcements arrive on the table. So he only has to lose 6 breakpoints in order to lose the game. He only has to lose 6 units for the Ottomans to lose the game. Once the reinforcements come on, the breakpoint jumps to 11. So that's much more comfortable, but it's a bit dangerous until they arrive. The artillery blasts out again and gets a bit lucky, inflicting 2 hits on the guard cuirassiers, taking them down to a 5. So that is increasing the chances that the guns might survive the coming charge. On the Russian right, the huge corps of Russian infantry continues its advance and starts climbing the hill towards the Ottoman hidden units. Here the Ottoman realizes that he made a mistake. He put these artillery behind the crest. Now that does mean that they can't be observed and can't be fired on, but it also means that the Russians will get to the top of the hill before the Ottomans will be able to engage them. And here the guard goes in. So the guard grenadiers hit the Nizam il-Sadid, the guard cuirassiers charge the artillery, and the other cuirassiers charge the Ottoman regular cavalry. So the Russians have the advantage in all 3 of these attacks. On the Ottoman left, a unit of irregular cavalry charges the outermost Russian brigade, but even though it is charging infantry in the open, it is fairly weak cavalry, and so it gets bounced, taking 2 hits and only inflicting 1 on the Russian infantry. The Ottoman cavalry here you see deployed, but they are unable to charge because they can't see the Russian infantry yet because they are behind the crest. The results of the Russian charges, that the only unsuccessful one was against the artillery, which managed to bounce the Guard cuirassiers, taking them down further in strength. But the artillery is now almost spent. It has used up 4 of its ammunition. The Guard Grenadiers inflicted a huge hit on the Nizam el Sadid, taking them down to only 1 strength. So that's why they have pulled back into the marsh here. They are out of the game now. The cuirassiers beat the regular Ottoman cavalry by 1 dice, and that means that they were pushed back, taking 1 hit, but the cuirassiers also took 1 hit, down to a 6. The Cossacks have now revealed all of the units in the entrenchment. The final unit of Nizam el Sadid is in garrison in the village, so that'll be a tough target. And there is a unit of foot artillery on the left. Unfortunately, the Russian guns can fire at the flank of the foot artillery, and that means that it has no protection from the entrenchments. Therefore, they roll a total. They are halved on artillery firing on artillery, but the 2 of them together are still firing 7 dice, 3 for each battery, plus 1 for the artillery officer. And they score 3 hits on the guns, which forces the guns to retire, and they are off the board without having even fired a shot. It turns out that the closest target of the cuirassiers is the Nizam el Sadid that just came out of the entrenchments. So they charge in at a factor of 7 against a factor of 7 for the Ottoman infantry. However, the Ottoman infantry is re-rolling hits because they are charged by cavalry in the open. However, the Nizam el Sadid get lucky and they manage to bounce the Russian cuirassiers. Russian cuirassiers taking 2 hits and the Nizam el Sadid taking only 1. So that has taken a bit of pressure off the Ottoman line. In the Ottoman turn, the regular cavalry charges the rear of the Guard Grenadiers. The fact that it's the rear doesn't really matter since they have are going to be re-rolling their hits as infantry charged by cavalry in the open in any case. So it doesn't make any difference whether it's front, flank, or rear for their result. At the same time, one of the irregular cavalry takes the opportunity to charge in on the horse artillery, and that is touch and go. The artillery has used up 3 of its ammunition. The irregular cavalry is only 5 strength, so it will need good rolling to win. The regular cavalry doesn't do so well. It only inflicts 1 hit on the rear of the Guard Grenadiers and then bounces back. So that was 1 hit each. You see the Guard Grenadiers now down to 2, but the Ottoman cavalry is getting eroded. However, the irregular cavalry got lucky and they managed to overrun the Russian horse battery. It rolled only 1 hit and the irregular cavalry rolled 2. When artillery is doubled in combat, it is eliminated. So that is the first unit eliminated so far in the battle. On the other flank, the 2 forces continued to stare at each other on different sides of the hill. The irregular cavalry attempt another charge on the flanking Russian infantry, but get bounced again. They are not having much success even against infantry in the open. So this is the Ottoman casualties so far. All three of these have retired. They have not been eliminated. One artillery was shot up by the Russian heavy guns and forced to retire. The Nizam el-Sadid infantry was charged by the Guard Grenadiers and reduced to 1 strength, but still managed to retire rather than be eliminated. And the heavy artillery did good damage and held up the Russian attack for a while, but then once its ammunition was depleted, the Ottoman player decided to withdraw it across the river rather than use up its last ammunition and probably getting it eliminated. With time on the Ottoman side, the Russians decide to push on their right and advance to the crest of the hill. Next turn, they'll be able to bring the Ottomans under skirmish fire if they don't move. The Russians have a fence in depth here. They turn some of their flanking infantry in to attack the entrenchment from the side. Their infantry is pushing forward against the Ottoman cavalry. It's quite hard to beat cavalry. You can enter a long battle of skirmish attrition, just firing on them at skirmish range factors each turn, but that will be slow to grind them down. It's very hard to charge them because if you charge the cavalry, you'll be regarded as infantry in the open and have to re-roll all your hits. Yeah, it's quite difficult for infantry to press forward against cavalry. They really need their own cavalry to lead the way. On the other flank, the battle continues. The irregular cavalry got mauled by the dragoons and the cuirassiers of the Russians, but ended up only taking 2 hits and now have 2 strength. The Russian cavalry is now getting a little bit attritioned, so it's looking tricky for them to make big gains here. And at last, the reinforcement dice turns up at a 2 for the Ottomans, and on turn 14, the Janissary Corps streams onto the battle. Now, the way that this works is they can come on 2 base widths deep into the battlefield, and any Russian unit that is within those 2 base widths has to retreat out of the way. So here you can see some of the weakened Russian dragoon units pulling out and retreating away from the Ottoman reinforcements. You can see here there are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Russian units here, and a full 10 Ottoman units have come on board, plus there is still some cavalry able to operate from the original Ottoman line. So now the tables have definitely turned here, and the Russians are on the retreat and are going to have to try and extricate as many units as they can. On the other side of the battlefield, the Ottomans all charged in, but because the Russians had reached the crest, they had to charge uphill. Now, one of their units did very well, other one on the right, and managed to get the Russian brigade down to only 1 strength there. But the other 2 bounced and had to withdraw, with one of them taking 2 hits. The Russians have now able to open up at skirmish range and can bring the Ottomans under fire. You can also see one of the Russian brigades charging the provincial infantry in the entrenchment. Because they're coming from the side, the entrenchment doesn't benefit the Ottomans, and the Ottomans are already down at strength 3 because they received some hits from the Russian heavy guns. And here you can see the Russian brigade managed to run over the provincial infantry and eliminate them. That is the first unit eliminated for the Ottomans. But now that the reinforcements have arrived on board, their break point has jumped, and they're no longer very vulnerable to losing the 6 units. They now need about 8 units before they will rout. On the right flank, the Ottoman reinforcements rush forward. There are veteran janissaries who double up onto the Guard Grenadiers to make sure that the unit goes down. Also, another unit of janissaries charges the Russian dragoons. Uh, they do have to re-roll their hits because they are charging cavalry in the open, but because they're charging the flank of the cavalry has to re-roll hits as well. So the Ottoman player is hoping that with a strength of only 2, it might be possible to eliminate both of these units. The rest of his cavalry pushes forward as fast as he can in order to try to catch the Russians. On the other side of the map, the Ottoman cavalry charges in on the weakened Russian brigade. Uh, it has survived 3 previous cavalry charges in the open, but this one is the last straw. It is an automatic win for the Ottomans, and they also must pursue since Ottoman regular cavalry is impetuous. And on this flank, at last, the Ottoman final column arrives, the reinforcements. There are 2 regular cavalry, 2 provincial infantry, and 1 conscript janissaries. They, like on the other side, they are set in 2 base widths deep, and all of the Russian infantry that they touched was forced to flee. So I think you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different infantry that were forced to run away from that attack. Uh, they are facing the wrong way, but still a strong force of infantry. So, but it now looks very hard for the Russians to be able to break through on this flank as well, now that the reinforcements have arrived, and they will just pull out their infantry and try to stabilize their line. So here you can see the position across the whole battlefield. The Russian Guard Grenadiers in the foreground were destroyed, but the dragoons survived to fight another day. The Russian is pulling all of his cavalry back to form a defensive line. He still has some reserves intact around the village in the middle, but is looking threatened on both flanks. And the Ottomans are starting to envelop and close in onto the Russians. In the Russian turn, they scramble to get their infantry out. Their cavalry charges in onto the Ottoman cavalry uphill in order to buy some time, but bounces and drops back behind their infantry. Their infantry forms square in order to repel the Ottoman cavalry. The infantry down the bottom takes another unit of the entrenchment, forcing the Ottoman infantry back, but they are now pretty much surrounded. On the other side, the Ottoman makes a general charge. The veteran janissaries charge again against the Russian dragoons in the rear. The irregular cavalry charges the cuirassiers in the center, and the regular cavalry charges the Russian horse gun that has just been revealed. The rest of the Ottomans press forward as fast as they can. The attack on the horse artillery fails, with the Ottoman cavalry bouncing and now down to only 2 strength, but they have reinforcements around them. The irregular cavalry did very well, hitting the rear of the Russian Guard cuirassiers and eliminating them. And the final dragoon unit was eliminated from behind by the veteran janissaries as well. So now the Russians on this flank have suffered 5 unit losses. One horse artillery, the Guard Dragoons, the Guard Grenadiers, and 3 dragoon units. So 5 units in total, plus 1 unit on the other side for a total of 6 eliminations to the Russians so far. The Ottomans have 1 elimination and 3 units retired. On the other flank, the Ottomans generally advance. One of their cavalry units sees off one of the Russian hussars, and the rest tried to shoot, not very successfully. There are 2 Russian units that have taken the entrenchments, but are now thoroughly surrounded by the Ottoman army. The cavalry look like they will be able to get a flank charge in on the guns, which is particularly dangerous since they only need double hits to eliminate the guns, and when they're re-rolling hits, it's much more likely. At this point, we called the game that it was almost impossible now for the Russians to win. There were 2 ways they could win. They could take all 3 objectives on the map, but the objective on the left flank was now pretty secure with the Russians retreating, or they could win by breaking the Ottoman morale. And now that the reinforcements has arrived, the breakpoint has gone up from 6 to 11, and the Russians have only eliminated 1 unit so far, so they would have to eliminate another 10 units. It was also quite unlikely that the Russian army would be broken. They have suffered 6 unit eliminations so far, and because of Kutsov, the legend, they need to have a 12 units eliminated in order to break. There's probably a couple more cavalry that the Ottomans could hunt down. Particularly the Cossacks are weak, and the remaining dragoons are still fairly weak. And there's a couple of Russian infantry units surrounded over on the other side, but it is quite unlikely that they'll get up to 12. And in any case, the Ottomans only have to hold the field in order to win, because they were starting ahead on 4 victory points to 3. So this was the final position that the Ottomans held the field and therefore had the victory. In the debrief that followed, there was discussions. The Ottomans did have very good dice in the initial attack of the Russian cavalry coming round the wood, and that could have been much more painful for the Ottomans. But they still have to kill 6 units, and they didn't even kill 1 at that point, so not that likely. The Russian artillery, the horse guns, did very well, but the rest of the artillery was a bit of a non-event. They had 2 guns in reserve near the village that were never used, and the 2 heavies over on the other side, they did manage to eliminate the Ottoman artillery, but they didn't manage to achieve any morale hits, so they were not that effective. In the after-battle debrief, we discussed opening up with the Russian artillery early and peppering the whole front and reducing the Ottoman strength before the infantry went in. That was one thing that we talked about. Also, giving some more infantry support to the cavalry attack coming round the flank, since it was really cavalry plus horse artillery only there. The other consideration was whether the Russian player was a bit greedy in trying to win on both flanks, that the troops on the other side of the river didn't achieve very much in the game. And if those troops had been used to squash the main Ottoman force behind the barricades and coming through the wood, then it is possible that those forces could have been overwhelmed before the Ottoman reinforcements came onto the board. So yeah, that the overall result was that it was a close run thing. And some good early dice rolls from the Ottomans made all the difference. The Scharnhorst system got a big thumbs up, that it set up a really interesting battle with a very classic outnumbered force having to hold until the reinforcements arrive. My thanks to James, a very gentlemanly opponent, and also a really tough Blucher player, especially with the Russians. Would encourage everyone to have a go at the Scharnhorst campaign system. It does make for really interesting battles and makes it much more fun than just lining up 300 points against each other. And with that, I'll sign off and see you in the next video.